It's the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, and as the Formula One teams and cars arrive at the Interlagos circuit in Brazil, it's the third weekend in a grueling triple header of flyaway races. And as a result, hardly anybody has bought any upgrades to the cars whatsoever. And so you might think we'd just end tech talk at that point, but we're not going to, because there's been an awful lot of action over the last 3 weekends, and there's still more to come. And considering 2 of those weekends, including Brazil, have been sprint weekends, that sort of explains the low amount of upgrades we're seeing on this third race of the triple. However, there is still a lot to unpack, and I thought we'd take a look back at some of the developments that started back in Austin, emerged more in Mexico, and we're seeing again in Brazil, because there are some fascinating details going on up and down the pit lane. And when I say down the pit lane, sadly, that means we must start with the only team to bring an upgrade to Sao Paulo. It's Haas. The Haas team introduced a slightly revised front wing flap onto the VF23 for its arrival at Interlagos. Of course, we'll all remember that Haas introduced a major upgrade package to that car for the Mexican Grand Prix, but with only 1 hour of practice, couldn't quite get the most out of it. Then went to the high altitudes of Mexico City, and they couldn't make it work there either. And actually, the only upgrades they brought to Mexico City were to do with brake cooling, and that became a critical factor in a rather spectacular moment during the Grand Prix. Kevin Magnussen had an absolutely enormous crash during the Mexican Grand Prix when he was locked in a close battle with the Williams of Logan Sargent. And at first glance, it was an absolute mystery as to why this crash happened. The Haas car looked almost completely destroyed, buried in a pile of rubble on the side of the track. But these last shots give us a real inkling as to what really happened. And it does get a little bit air crash investigation-y here, because it does look like the car is pretty fundamentally destroyed. But check this out. The fire coming from the left rear wheel, that's coming out of the brake system. Why is it on fire? Well, that's what we need to take a slightly more detailed look at, because it was that fire and that heat that caused the accident. But you have to dig deeper into the reasons for the accident to see that happening. Now, that clip we just showed you, this is the same clip slowed down. It's a bit jerky because it's frame by frame, and you can see the Haas just coming into the shot here. Note, and it's a bit out of focus because it's a very high-speed bit of footage, you can see the rear wheel just coming in. Now, it's at the right angle. It's fully attached to the rear of the car at this point, as it should be. But as the car comes into the corner, the wheel gets loaded up, and you can just see now the back edge of the wheel is starting to get a slightly funny angle on it. It's beginning to bend out of position, which a rear wheel really shouldn't. And you can start to see that the top link of the suspension has completely failed. Look, the wheel now is barely attached to the rear of the car. It should be pointing the same way as the front wheel. It very definitely is not. And as the car goes out of frame, you can see that left rear suspension has failed. And actually, if you wind this back ever so slowly, you can actually see what happens. Just this top link of the suspension has failed. That carbon fibre, that metal union to the rear upright has failed, and the car goes out of control and into the barriers for that big accident. The Haas team investigated the accident quite extensively, and they had been aware that the left rear brakes on that Haas were overheating during that battle with the Williams. They'd been radioing the driver, telling him to manage the brake temperatures, and he certainly did. The team were aware of the issues with brake temperatures at the Mexican Grand Prix. It's a high altitude circuit, which means they opened up the front brake duct exit quite significantly to be able to evacuate more cooling air out of the front brakes, because they needed that to keep the brakes cool. So they knew there was an issue. However, what they didn't do was modify the rear brake ducts back here. This is the right rear, but it's the same on both sides. And they kept the same package that they'd used at other recent races with that big upgrade package. That meant that the Haas team were running the same rear cooling package as they had always done. Of course, they were running the maximum amount of cooling on the Brembo brakes, the discs and the pads. However, what happened was the brakes just got hotter and hotter and hotter in that tight battle, and eventually the sensor for the brake temperatures failed. At that point, the team no longer had data coming from the left rear corner. They knew that their brakes were hot, they were instructing the driver to keep them cool, but once the sensor dropped out because it got too hot, The next item in that chain of failure was that suspension linkage, and at that point the accident was inevitable. Haas have said that they don't need to do any more modifications to the car to prevent that happening again. They just know that if the sensor drops out, they've got a serious problem. Sticking in Mexico, let's take a look at the Alfa Romeo. We haven't really talked enough about this car this season, but they introduced a slight modification. Well, I say slight, pretty major modification to the floor of the car. You can see this legality wire section where you've got that little wire linking the edge of the floor along the side edge of the floor to keep it within the dimensional regulations. And that's something you'll see a few teams doing up and down the pit lane. Mercedes were the first, but it's not an uncommon practice in motorsport. But what they did introduce was this raised segment in the middle of the floor. Now, while it looks quite simple, it's a little bit deceptive. This part will belie a huge amount of beautiful sculpting on the underside of the floor, which we'll never get to see unless one of the drivers makes a little bit of a boo-boo out on track and we get to see the bottom of the car, which none of the drivers want to do. But the reason I wanted to talk a little bit about Alfa Romeo as well is take a look at the old floor, much simpler. You've got these cutouts in the side. Well, they've moved away from that concept, rather Red Bull style concept actually, and they've gone for this raised centre section. But the real reason was I wanted to talk about this moment with Valtteri Bottas, now confirmed as the fastest man in Formula One, at least in a straight line. During the Grand Prix, I think this was about lap 63, the Alfa Romeo got into the toe of the pair of Alpines along the long straight in that thin air, and they were in the wake of a very high-speed Haas as well. And this giant toe plus DRS gave Bottas a new record top speed for this generation of car of 363 kph, or 363.6 kph if you want to be exact. Now, if you want to take a look at how the current generation of F1 cars make their top speeds, well, take a look elsewhere on this channel and you can see a video from the Mexican Grand Prix where we explain that in a great amount of detail. Moving along the pit lane, there have been some other major technical changes, but not to the cars. We've heard that Mike Elliott has left the Mercedes team. He's resigned and he's gone on gardening leave. And this is a pretty significant change because when you lose a key member of your technical team, it does sort of upset the apple cart. And with the current cost cap regulations in force, losing a highly paid engineer, probably higher in the salary brackets at that team, it does open up the possibility of maybe recruiting a couple more or free graduates for the same salary. Is that a more efficient spend? And is that why Elliott left the team? Well, we can hear now from Mike Elliott earlier in the season explaining what his plans were to improve the performance of the Mercedes this car and looking forward to next year as well.
Formula One's all about learning and about turning that learning into performance. And I think, we were here at the end of last season feeling like we were in decent shape and then didn't get it right over the winter. And you have to just learn from that. You have to understand what went wrong and understand what it is you need to fix. There's so much we can do in this year's car and there's so much we need to sort of bake into a new car. And hopefully we've learned all the lessons we need to learn and hopefully we turn up with a decent package next year.
As you say, this time last year, and I imagine particularly around Brazil time, you had that faith in the concept that it would follow through into this year and be more competitive. What have you changed in order to fully appreciate and better appreciate what is and isn't working and where the potential does and doesn't lie?
I guess, like I said before, you're constantly learning. These are prototype cars. Every time you run them, you gain more information, more data. And theories that you've got, some you dismiss, you learn new theories and you try and move forward. So I think it's really about learning, and it's not sort of one single thing that you can say, oh, we've changed this, and suddenly you go from being not competitive to being competitive. I think it's always that sort of constant evolution of the car. How can you make it better? How can you make it better faster than the opposition are doing? And we've been playing catch up. And I think a lot of what we're seeing in this season are some of our hangovers from last season and some of the problems we had with that car. So hopefully we've now fixed all the issues, and hopefully we can get into the winter, do the job that the team are capable of doing, and bring a good car next year. And it's not going to be easy. Red Bull are a quick car. They probably stopped their development early, but we've just got to push as hard as we can, focus on what we can change and deliver the best we can for next year.
So with Mike Elliott now on gardening leave, a funny expression which means a member of staff is still employed by the organisation but isn't allowed to work for the organisation or any other organisation. So all they're really allowed to do is tend their garden, hence the expression. So while Mike Elliott's potatoes are getting better and maybe his winter vegetables are coming on strongly, the team is now going to have to restructure. And losing, as I said earlier, losing a key member of technical staff or gaining a new member of technical staff can actually change the feel in the drawing office, the design office. A key member like that will bring their interpretation of how you manage a team, how you operate the team. Do you meet over coffee? Do you meet at lunchtime? How those things structure. It all sounds a little bit minor. So how does it increase the performance of a car or even decrease the performance of a car? Well, it's all to do with the whole systematic structure of a team. And when a new technical director, or in this case chief technical operator, joins a team, as is the case down at Williams, where former Alpine engineer Pat Fry has taken over there as in that role as chief technical officer, you will see some pretty fundamental change. Because for Williams, while James Vowles has taken over as team principal, himself a very established engineer, bringing in someone with the vast experience of Pat Fry really could change the feel of working at Williams. And sometimes it's not always to everybody's taste. I don't know, I've never worked with Pat Fry, but different engineers maybe rub each other up the wrong way or get on together really well. So you can see engineering partnerships, engineering groups really leap forward if they all gel well, or it all goes a little bit wrong, as sometimes it used to do at the BAR Honda team apparently back in the day, where certain engineers didn't get on with other engineers and the car became uncompetitive as a result. Well, what will be the result at Williams? Hard to say, we'll have to see, but that team is hugely optimistic. One thing that Williams really benefited from in the US Grand Prix at Austin, Texas, was the disqualification of two cars that finished in the top six. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were found to have excessive wear on their wooden planks, or composite planks as we probably have to call them to keep Craig Scarborough happy. I decided to take a bit more of a look using some of Formula One's really advanced camera technology. It's called a phantom camera, and it shows how a car goes through a corner in great detail. This high-speed camera has about 1,000 frames per second and produces brilliant footage like this. This is one of the Ferraris going through a corner at Austin, and you can really see the effects of vibration, the different movements, the different dynamic forces going through the cars. Initially, I was looking at the tyres and trying to see the plank, which you can just see the bottom of here, where it's bottoming out through a corner, try to understand that a bit more. But what I noticed was something I found far more interesting. Keep your eye on the exhaust tailpipe here of the Ferrari, because it's doing something quite unusual. You'll see it here. Look at that oscillation. Now that's something I've never seen on a Formula One car before. Now you can see the wooden plank dropping out and bottoming out. I'm not looking at that anymore. I'm looking at the exhaust tailpipe of the Ferrari. I decided to take a look at both Ferraris through the same sequence of corners and to see a number of different laps to see if they did it more and more. And the results, I have to say, were breathtaking. Now check this car out. We've got the Ferrari coming through the corner. Keep your eyes firmly on this exhaust tailpipe. Now, all the exhaust tailpipes in Formula One are made from a type of special steel called Inconel. It deals with high temperature, it's quite lightweight, it's basically a very special sort of metal, but everybody uses it. And they all sort of perform in the same way. It's not something that you see big differences in. Now, take a look at this. I've highlighted the tailpipe there for you, as you see, but I'm going to take it off and I'm going to play this forward in slow motion slightly so we can see that oscillation on the exhaust play through a bit more, because you can see where it starts. It comes as the tyre rides up onto that curb on the apex of the corner, but at this point the tailpipe starts going really crazy, and look at the different shapes it forms. As we go through the corner, you can see it's beginning to deform quite substantially, and as it starts to deflect, look at that. You can just see the shape of the tailpipe is no longer round, it's becoming more like an egg, and you see it much clearer when I play it at full speed. Look at the way that exhaust is just flapping around up and down, and it gets pretty extreme at that moment as the car actually bottoms out, and you can really see the differences at this point. Watch this here. As I play this forward, you can see that. Look at that change from a circle to an egg. That is absolutely spectacular, and I have to say, it's not a great surprise that when the Ferraris arrived at the Brazilian Grand Prix or the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, they had to change the exhaust systems on both of their cars. Now, they didn't do that in Mexico. I just wonder, did they find, due to that sort of massive deflection that we're seeing there, is this something that the team have had to deal with and understand? I mean, look at it going there. It's like it's talking on its own, like an emoji or something. So on top of that, I decided to take a look at a few other cars. Let's watch a Ferrari through the corner at high speed again, because you see the same characteristic. It's pretty clear and it's pretty incredible. You can see a lot of other parts, though, of the car vibrating, deflecting, changing shape, and that's not unusual. But I wanted to see if any other team in F1 had this weird exhaust characteristic. Let's start with Red Bull, going through the same corner. This is a fixed camera. It's got everybody in focus, so you can really see the difference between the cars. Here we've got Sergio Perez coming through the same corner, and look, the exhaust pipe. It's moving around slightly, it is bouncing around as a result of the vibrations from the curb, but it's not deflecting in the same way the Ferrari exhaust is. It's staying still. You can just see here in this footage that actually part of the aerodynamic package on the rear of the Red Bull is a little bit broken in that shot. Car bottoms out, and you can just see now quite clearly where the cars have been bottoming out, and you can see that patch just there of a different colour, that sort of brown colour. That's where all of the cars have been hitting the ground and wearing away their planks. And in the case of Leclerc and Hamilton, wearing their planks too much. Check out a Ferrari-powered car here, the Alfa Romeo. Does the Alfa Romeo do the same? It's got the same power unit, the same exhaust system, but the tailpipe is probably team-specific. It's only a tube of metal, ultimately. And you can see it's moving up and down. It's vibrating up and down slightly, but you don't have that really distinctive wobble or that deformation that we saw on the Ferrari. So that's a little bit of an interesting one for me as well. Taking another look at one of the Honda powered cars, it's the same Red Bull over the corner. There were some other points I wanted to draw your attention to. So as the car comes over the curb, keep an eye on the outer edge, the outer wall, if you like, of the diffuser. And you'll start to see that starts flapping away something chronic. It's absolutely incredible. There's that much movement on the diffuser wall. And to me, that says there's going to be a massive aerodynamic effect as it's flapping away almost like a bird's wing on the underside of the car. And then in another shot of the same car, you can see why sometimes engineers tell their drivers to stay off the curbs, because when this Red Bull, which you can see is coming down quite hard, you can see the floor of the car just about to hit the road surface here. Keep an eye on the exhaust tailpipe as the car bottoms out. Big puff of smoke out of the exhaust. Something in that Honda power unit wasn't too happy. Then, last of all, let's take a look at one of the Mercedes-engined cars going through the same sequence of corners. You've got the Aston Martin here, and you do see some movement, some vibration. You can see the exhaust tailpipe moving around, but all in the same way, in a uniform fashion. Some of the parts at the back of the Aston Martin here don't look nearly as elastic as some of the other parts that you see on different cars, but you can see how the cars are bottoming out and even kicking up excess bits of plank sawdust on the outer edge of that curb. So it's just a lovely way to take a look at the performance of the different cars through a corner and perhaps uncover some slightly different, slightly unusual trends. We'll be keeping an eye on all of the technical developments as the season progresses, what's left of it, and everybody's now got their eyes on next year and another fascinating year of Formula One engineering.